Joining us right now, Susan Ferrechio, Chief Congressional Correspondent for the Washington Examiner. Hey, Susan, good morning.
Hey, good morning, guys.
Let's start with the congressional reaction to the Iran nuclear deal. As expected, Republican leadership, Mitch McConnell, John Boehner, many other key members of the Republican Party on the Hill pushed back against this deal, saying that it was a disaster. But what's more interesting, clearly, on the future of this deal is what the Democrats say. And I didn't hear much other than Bob Menendez. Anyone else speaking yesterday?
Right. I think the most interesting aspect of the reactions from Democrats yesterday is what they didn't say. It was the whole response was led off by Hillary Clinton because she was on Capitol Hill making the rounds. She came out of a private meeting with House Democrats talking about what wasn't in the agreement, which I thought was interesting, which is dealing with Iran on issues involving sponsorship of terrorism in the region, keeping Americans imprisoned and detained there wrongfully, and other problems with Iran that just are not addressed in this agreement. And she talks about the need to fix that problem, even though the negotiating is over.
It's over. Yeah.
Susan, what I think is very interesting about this, I read some of the reports of that closed-door meeting, and other Democrats were saying that she gave a full-throated endorsement of this deal. But in public, she's being much more cautious, talking about what work needs to be done, the need for verification. So why this disconnect? If she endorses the deal, do you think it's a problem for her to go out and do that publicly as it pertains to her campaign?
Well, she tried to have it both ways, both in the meeting and outside the meeting. She talked about supporting what one lawmaker called the core elements of the deal, but that she wanted to review it further. She did say that in the meeting. But then, of course, when she came out, she wanted to, talk about the need for enforcement and verification. I think that's going to be a big sticking point with Democrats. Having talked to many Democrats on Capitol Hill yesterday, personally, I know that the big issue right now with this with the agreement, whether they'll support it, is the verification in particular. Of course, we had hoped for these snapped inspections, anytime, anywhere inspections, but now there's up to a 24-day period where Iran would have advance notice of these inspections, and there's a lot of Democrats who are concerned about that. What does that mean for how well these sites can be inspected, how relevant these inspections can be under those circumstances? That's a big problem with some Democrats right now, and that's why they're wavering. We approached Harry Reid off camera asking about some of the things that were left out of the deal, and he had almost nothing to say other than, I don't know, I've got to read the agreement. So you have a lot of hesitation from Democrats on this right now. That doesn't mean they won't support it. To me, this means they need to be sold on this deal, and they haven't been sold on it yet.
You know what I think it comes down to? Do they trust Obama more than they trust Iran? And that's going to be a really, really hard sell in this environment.
Well, nobody trusts Iran. I think that was one of the big points that Democrats are making yesterday, that we don't trust Iran, period, on this. And so the question is how well this deal will provide assurances that we can check on them constantly to make sure that this thing is really being followed. And that again is the weak part of all of this. And so I think what it'll boil down to eventually when there's a vote is loyalty to the president, whether or not he can sell this deal. He's had some successes of late, of course, with the big trade deal, and some other stuff. He's able to lobby Capitol Hill successfully. And so can he sell this to his Democrats, and will they, people like Chuck Schumer of New York, how will he vote on this agreement? So there's going to be some really interesting observations made about how Democrats react to this when it comes down to voting for it or voting against it.
Well, you mentioned Chuck. That was actually the key player that I was going to bring up to you. Has Chuck Schumer said anything? He likes to present himself as a protector of Israel, and let's face it, a big core constituency of his base are Democratic Jewish voters in the state of New York. He's up for re-election. He would love to stay in that leadership role that he's going to inherit from Harry Reid. His could be a key voice of dissent against this deal.
That's right. And yesterday when we were asking the leaders how they felt about the deal, Schumer was silent. And then as soon as the press conference ended, we chased him basically into the House Senate chamber asking him what he thought of the deal, and he wouldn't respond. So I think, again, you're right. He's going to be a key player in all this, and his support of it could provide cover to other Democrats, or his decision not to support it could make it much harder to pass this because people may follow his lead. And so you're right. He is going to be a pivotal player, and we're all going to be waiting to see, where he falls down on this deal.
But a quick follow-up on that, Susan, though. He's the whip right now in the Senate. It's his job to get votes on behalf of the party when the president says, hey, I need the votes. Is this going to be one of those issues where the president and leadership of the Democratic Party in the Senate will not be whipping it and let people vote their conscience?
Yeah, I think that's very possible. You could just end up having the White House lobbying directly to senators. I think that's a very likely outcome here, and that's happened before, too, where they don't agree with the president. And the president, of course, this just happened with several recent pieces of legislation, and the White House is lobbying directly to lawmakers over the leadership. Everyone's wondering how the minority leader, Harry Reid, will come down on all this. Because, even though he's outgoing, he considers himself sort of a lame duck, people are going to wonder whether he has not said what he plans to do yet. He said he hasn't made up his mind, that he needs to read it. It's more than 100 pages long. In the end, I think Reid will come down in favor of this just to support the president and his legacy. Schumer, though, is harder to pin down on it because, of course, he's not going away. He'll be here in the next Congress, and he wants to protect his own reputation in terms of, supporting Israel.
Susan, what's your sense of timing on this? I know the president, I think he's going to come out and do a press conference today. When he wants something done, the incentive is always to rush, keep the momentum, while Republicans may want to slow it down. But are Senate Democrats interested in actually having a debate on this issue? They're saying now they want to study it and take their time. What's your sense of timing? The president can only afford to lose a dozen Senate Democrats. So does it help for him to have a debate in Congress quickly, or does it hurt to drag it out?
Right. I think that it won't happen quickly. First of all, the calendar is bogged down right now with these other priorities, the transportation funding bill, and in the House, everybody's tied up trying to figure out a way to move House and Senate spending bills, which are completely stalled at this point and have to pass by September 30th. You're going to see hearings happen, I think, fairly soon in both chambers, so where they're going to get a closer examination of this. But they do get their 60-day review period, which begins at some point in the coming days, that 60-day clock. So it's going to be at least that long. They've got, of course, the August recess, which doesn't end until September. They come back first week of September. So, we're looking at the fall at the earliest before there are even serious discussions about this. And don't forget, the fall, of course, is all about getting spending legislation out so that we avoid a government shutdown. So that's all this stuff is going to stand in the way, I think, of very serious consideration of this deal, although that could all come at the same time, which could make the end of this year very interesting in Congress.
Well, Susan Ferrechio, we got to leave it there. But as I say, may you live in interesting times, and covering Congress, covering Capitol Hill for the Washington Examiner. That's exactly what you're doing right now. Thanks, Susan.
That's right. Thanks a lot, you guys.